Hey guys, okay, so if you noticed in the last videos, it was a little bit catchy. It was a little bit coming in and out. So the internet at my house is bad, and now we are on campus in the Turner Center in my husband William's office. So hoping that this one is a little bit less, you know, less jumping around. So if you have questions about what is due this week or what you should be doing, please go to your email and look at the email from me and the announcement on Blackboard about how to be successful in BISC 104 this week. Okay, that will keep you on track. Do everything that I tell you to do, and you will pass this class. So for today, we are going to go over chapter 12, which I'm sharing my screen with you now. And chapter 12 is all about forces of evolutionary change. Okay, so last time we talked about chapter 1, the scientific method, as well as the 5 characteristics of life. And our last characteristic of life, which we're going to talk about throughout this course, was evolution. Okay, and so remember, evolution is just a change, a genetic change in a population over time. The basis for evolution are just the differences in a population based on their genes. So the ways that things look different is because of the heritable differences in their genome. So we're going to talk about forces of evolutionary change. Starting off in this chapter, there is more about what is evolution, some math-based stuff about how we can actually see evolution in action through allele frequencies, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So what is evolution? Why does this giraffe have a long neck? Why do these bleeding heart flowers have such a strange shape? And it's because through the process of evolution and natural selection, these organisms that have had traits that cause them to really excel in their environment, they're selected for. Remember that snake example, okay? So the snake that was in sand-colored snake and it's living in the sand, okay? What could it do more of? Well, it could live longer because there were fewer predators that were going to find it. It could, if it's living longer, it's going to eat more. And if it's eating more, it's healthy and living longer, so it's going to reproduce more. If you're living longer, eating more, reproducing more, your genes are going to be present more in the next generation. So for instance, this giraffe, it's an African savanna. Something about the African savanna, which we'll learn about later on in this class, is that there's very little sort of this ground cover, these plants as ground cover, right? There are these really sparsely populated large trees. So if you had a giraffe with a short neck, would it have very much as a food source? No. So in this particular population, and particular environment, the selective pressure is that what these giraffes have to eat is up high. The giraffes with the longer necks are going to survive longer because they're able to eat more. Because they're able to survive longer and eat more, they're going to reproduce more. So that trait, that really long neck, is going to be present more in the next generation. Similarly, for these bleeding heart flowers, so the shape of these flowers, and I'm sure you've seen lots of different flowers with really unique shapes, the more unique the shape is of a flower, the more specific their pollinators are. Okay, so in a case like this, it's probably a hummingbird or a butterfly, okay, with this really long, a butterfly has this really, really long proboscis that will go into the tube of this flower to get nectar. So it's rewarded for pollinating these flowers. So you have these coevolution relationships as well, where you have something like a hummingbird or something like a butterfly going more often to something like a bleeding heart flower or a sweet pea flower than a rose, for instance, because it is so well suited to pollinate that flower. And then coevolution happens. You have these flowers becoming more and more well suited to their pollinators. Okay, so all of that is just evolution. The flowers that are better suited for a specific pollinator will most always get pollinated. So the more specific they can be, the better in terms of natural selection. So evolution explains the features of all organisms from microbes to humans. And all it is, it's descent with modification. Okay, changes in heritable traits from generation to generation. So descent, you're going from generation to generation, with modification, meaning that traits that were once favored are not always going to be the ones that are perfect in that particular environment, because guess what? Do all environments stay the same? No, environments change constantly, okay? Even like your environment. So I think about, this was actually a really good example like 2 years ago. We had rain in Oxford for 2 weeks straight. And I'm not talking like trickles of rain. I'm saying like storm day and night for 2 weeks 2 years ago. And what happens is that by my house, we had this little like dam thing. The dam breaks and it literally a new river is formed, and you have water draining from this lake into just this forested area. It takes down so many trees. All of a sudden, there's no ground cover anymore. It's just sand, and now it's got this little sort of flowing creek through it. And so the environments, they change constantly. Based on the changes that happen there, you're going to have maybe new species living there. You're going to have species that used to live there that are not well suited there anymore, and things like that. So environments change all the time. And that's why a trait that used to be beneficial in an environment may not always be beneficial in that environment. So descent with modification. So evolution, if you will remember, does not occur within an individual. It occurs within a population. So if you're dropped off in the ocean and you got to swim back to shore, would it be advantageous for you to be able to just sprout gills? Yes, it would. Would it be awesome if a baby giraffe in the African savannah could be like, wow, I really need that leaf right there. I just need to like grow my neck really quickly and then I'll be able to reach that leaf. Would that be advantageous? Yes. Are those things possible? No. Okay. So an individual cannot evolve. An individual can certainly change. You can grow, you can develop, you can like change your points of view, you can like learn, you can all of those things, but you're not evolving as an individual. So evolution occurs in a population when allele frequencies change from one generation to the next. Now, if you'll remember from BISC 102, okay, you had a whole genetics section in BISC 102 and talking about alleles, okay? So what are alleles? I want you to remember back to that genetics section. So alleles are just different versions of a gene. And we can think about this really easily with humans. So like everybody has genes, no matter who you are. You have genes for eye color. You have genes for hair color. You have genes for height. You have genes for like shoe size and whatever it is, okay? Now, does everybody have the same height and eye color and hair color and shoe size? No, we don't. That's because there are all of these different alleles of those genes that are going to come together to make like unique traits in different people. Okay, so a single chromosome. So here's a chromosome. It has each gene, every single gene on every single chromosome. It has, oh, and I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see this. All right, so here's a chromosome, every single gene on every single chromosome. So for instance, let's just say that here to here, this is gene A, over here is gene B, and over here is gene D. Okay, so notice you have 2 copies of every single gene. Where did you get those 2 copies from? Well, you got 1 copy from your mom and 1 copy from your dad. So every single gene, you got 1 version of that gene from your mom that could be the same or could be different from the version of the gene that you got from your dad. Okay, so think eye color. Do both of your parents have the same eye color or the same hair color? Probably not. So they are able to contribute to you different alleles. And the way that, so for instance, if you have two parents with brown hair, but you have blonde hair, well, that's entirely possible because it's possible that they were heterozygotes. Remember, big A, little a dominant allele and a recessive allele, and you're a heterozygote. So if they each gave you the recessive allele, you're gonna have that recessive trait. So, okay, two alleles for every single gene. And let's go back to, this is gonna be important because, so if I said there is one person, we're talking about one person, we're talking about me, okay, one person, how many alleles for eye color do I have? I have two, okay? Then we're talking about me and my husband, William. Okay, so we have two people and each person has two alleles. So now how many alleles do we have in this little partnership? Well, we have four. So as you're talking about number of alleles in a population and how those alleles can change over time, we need to talk about this allele frequency. So we're gonna go back to our PowerPoint. All right, so we are going to talk about allele frequencies, how they change from one generation to the next, but a population, this is the biological definition of a population, is a group of interbreeding organisms of the same species. Now, what's important about populations is that, like, if you take a tiger from a zoo in Mississippi and a tiger from the wild in Africa, can they mate? Can they interbreed? Are they the same species? Yes, but would they? Would they naturally? No, because they're completely spatially separated, okay, by continents, by large bodies of water, okay, so they wouldn't. And this is going to be how new species actually come about, is because specific populations are going to have different selective pressures on them. You have a completely different environment in sub-Saharan Africa than you have in Oxford, Mississippi, completely different. So you have different selective pressures. Some alleles are going to be more common while some alleles become less common. And that's just how it works, right? If you have only two options, a big A or a little a, is there an option of having a medium-sized A? Like, could you have, no, it's not. You have a dominant allele or a recessive allele. If the dominant allele becomes more common, the recessive allele becomes less common. If the recessive allele becomes more common, the dominant allele becomes less common, okay? So here's where we're talking about allele frequency. You're going to calculate it using this equation. You have the number of copies of an allele, of a specific allele. So like the number of copies of big A, for instance, or the number of copies of the recessive allele, which is little a, divided by the total number of alleles for the same gene in the population. And you'll calculate that by finding out the number of individuals in that population. Each individual in that population has how many alleles? Two. Okay, so take the number of individuals. If you have 50 individuals, how many total alleles do you have? 100. 50 times 2 is 100. So number of copies of an allele divided by the total number of alleles for that gene in that population. I'm going to go over an example. Here is how you're going to calculate allele frequency. And I would tell you something like this, okay? A gene has two possible alleles, either big A for a dominant allele or little a for a recessive allele. In that population, you have 100 individuals. So how many alleles, doesn't matter which allele, how many alleles do you have in that population? Well, 100 times 2 is 200. Okay, so you've got your total number of alleles as 200. If 160 alleles are little a, are the recessive allele, then the frequency of little a is going to be 160 divided by the total number of alleles, which is 200, and that's going to equal 0.8. Okay, so 80% of the alleles in that entire population are the recessive version of that allele, meaning that 20% of the alleles in that population are the dominant allele. Okay, all right, so among population members, 80% of the chromosomes, 80% of every chromosome in that population will carry that allele of that particular gene. Okay, all right, so here is another example. Let me see if I can move this. I've got a box that you can't see. All right, this isn't something that you have to answer at all. This is just like if we were in class, we would have had clicker questions and you would have been answering this, but I'm going to keep some of these around as practices for you. Yeah, so we can just go through this together. So if you have a population of 200 individuals which contain alleles for tongue length, big T or little t, the population has how many alleles? And that's your first question. If you have 200 individuals, how many alleles does each of those individuals have? Each individual has 2 alleles, either big T or little t, okay? So times 2, that's going to be 400 total alleles in that population. Then the next question says, if the allele little t, that recessive allele, is present in 100 individuals, then what is the allele frequency? Okay, so guys, your only answer, okay? Okay, so if little t is present in 100 individuals, so you know the number of little t alleles, that's going to be 100 divided by the total number of alleles in that population, which is 400. But as you can see from these answers, the only one that would even fit is this first one, because your first question was how many alleles? You have 400 total alleles, and that's A is the only one that even fits with that. So you already knew from the first question, but how you get this answer, if you have 100 little t alleles, you put 100 over the total number of alleles, divide those numbers, and then you get 0.25. So 25%, a quarter of individuals in this population have the recessive allele. What does that mean about the percentage of the population that has the dominant allele? 75%, 0.75 people. Well, 0.75, that's the allele frequency for that population for the dominant allele. Okay, if you're confused about that, stop it, rewind it, go back. That's the answer. So evolution is detectable by examining the population's gene pool. That's the entire collection of genes and alleles. So remember that you have a whole genome. Every organism has a genome. Most of your genome is filled with non-coding spacer regions, okay, that protect you from mutations. But you also have thousands and thousands and thousands of genes. Every gene has 2 alleles, one from your mom, one from your dad. You could have the same alleles from mom and dad, both dominant, both recessive, or you could have one dominant and one recessive. So what each individual contributes to a population is going to be that population's gene pool. So even for the same species, gene pools are going to differ from population to population. So for instance, if you have a Swedish population and a Korean population, well, those two populations, they are physically separated. Unless you have migration, you're not having any sort of gene mixture, right? Literally, without migration, you have these two completely separate populations. But does that happen? No. You have travel, you have migration, you have people just moving to different places all the time. Okay, so any new introduction of a human to or an organism to a population that they weren't in before is going to literally change the gene pool of that population. So in this example, If Swedes migrate to Asia or to Korea, for instance, and interbreed with locals, then allele frequencies in the gene pool will change. Evolution has then occurred because you're literally from one generation. Before the Swedish person got there, you had this particular gene pool. Now, the Swedish person has gotten there in the next generation, interbred. They're part of that gene pool now. You have changed the allele frequency in that population. This happens all the time. Migration is a huge part of human evolution because we are able to literally travel the world without, it doesn't matter at all that you and I just on foot could not travel from our own continent, right? Because we have mechanisms of travel. But if you think about like other organisms that have no ability to go and visit new populations, well, those are separate gene pools then. All right, microevolution. These are going to be small changes in allele frequencies observed from generation to generation. This is like when a single Swedish person came into a Korean community, interbred, got married, got a little partner, having little babies, and now you have changed the allele frequency in that population. So that's microevolution. We're able to view changes in allele frequency with that equation that I showed you before from generation to generation versus macroevolution in the macro, okay? We're not looking at generation to generation. We are looking over very long periods of time, okay? So allele frequencies changes observed over long periods of time. Macroevolution gives rise to new species, okay? Gives rise to new species. So another question, which of the following can evolve according to the biological definition of evolution? And I'm gonna just go through these answers with you. A group of fir trees in Oregon, Earth's climate, a single fly as it develops from larva to adult, or a fossilized turtle. So a fossilized turtle, it's dead, so can it evolve? No, you can't evolve when you're dead. You can't contribute to the next generation. You can't contribute to new allele frequencies in the next generation if you're dead. A single fly, as it develops from a larva to an adult. Well, can an individual evolve? No, an individual cannot evolve. Earth's climate. Can Earth's climate evolve? No. Why can Earth's climate not evolve? Because climate is a whole lot of things. It's heat, it's precipitation, it's like wind currents. It's a lot of stuff goes into climate. So just because it's not a living, breathing organism, does that mean that the climate can't change? The climate can definitely change, and it has been changing for hundreds of years, okay? Mostly because of us. But we also have, Earth's climate has little fluctuations just from your different seasons, okay? So it cannot evolve because it's not a living thing. A group of fir trees in Oregon, this is a population of a single species. Fir trees is the species, and you have a group of them. That's a population in one place in Oregon. They can evolve. Over generations, if a few individuals become better suited for their environments, they will be able to put out more pine cones, for instance. They will be able to reproduce more, have their traits more present in the next generation. So the answer is A. Okay, guys, we are going to stop here, and I am going to, just to make this a bite-sized sort of lecture, and I am going to start on the next one.